Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today the topic is, of course, none other than the United States 2020 elections. For my guests tonight, we have the Council of Republicans Overseas Israel, Abe Katzman, and via Zoom, we have lecturer on public policy at Haifa University and media spokesperson for Democrats Abroad Israel, Chezi Kugler. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
All right, now, before we begin, though, let's take a look quickly at what the latest voters have been saying.
My name is Douglas Wishart. I currently live in Westland, Michigan, and this year I'm voting for Donald J. Trump. Not because of his personality, but because of the policies he represents. While I don't agree with everything he says, the matter of fact is a lot of the laws that the left are trying to get passed are detrimental to our country, whether it be anti-hate speech laws, gun laws, and packing the court. As fortunate it is, I do not like Donald Trump personally, but I love his policies. They make a lot of sense for our country, and I think it's the best way forward.
He keeps his promises. He's not a politician, and that's why I voted for him. He's not a politician. So does he stick his foot in his mouth? Yeah, he does. I don't care. He keeps his promises.
I'm very optimistic. I mean, there's definitely a little bit of a sense of anxiety because of what happened 4 years ago, but looking at the early voting numbers, the Democratic versus Republican distribution, I think it's promising, and the polls are looking good, so I'm just happy to get it over with tomorrow.
He seems like he gets at least better than our current president, what the average everyday American goes through. And I guess I support that. I like that there's a candidate out there that understands what, I as a average everyday American go through in my life.
Now, Trump has been filling his last few days, of course, before the election with as many rallies as he can. Biden is also still campaigning, not nearly as much as Trump. What is the final message that these candidates are trying to leave with their voters? Chezi, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think the final message that Joe Biden is leaving with the voters is a message of hope, a message of, we're in a crisis today, can't be ignored. But if Americans will act as Americans, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, rather to unite as a single country, then just as they have done in the past, they will be able to overcome this crisis and come out stronger than ever. Joe Biden's message is a message of unification as opposed to division. It's a message of inclusiveness as opposed to a message of racism and turning Americans against Americans. It's a message of fairness and a message of honesty, dignity, and restoration of honor to the highest office in the land, really the highest office around the world. Something we can look up to, we can be proud of, and somebody who we can follow with a good feeling in our hearts. Without the sorts of relations that even Trump supporters have no alternative but to express, as you just heard.
Abe?
Actually, I think that Joe Biden's final message, as it has been all along, is I am not Donald Trump. Other than that, it's very difficult to point to any kind of agenda that he's running on, and that's actually very worrisome. He appears to be more a placeholder than anything else, which always bothers me when people speak about, let's say, his attitudes toward Israel or what. I don't know that he's setting policy. The guy stops campaigning every day at 9 a.m. I don't see him really being a detail-oriented, serious top-down manager in the White House. And the problem is, I don't know who's actually calling the shots. I know that Bernie Sanders and a number of other people had a lot to do with writing the everything that is on their website. They have the understandings there. It's the Green New Deal. It's a leftist wish list.
Sure. All right. Well, so I want to bring things back to Israel for a little bit now, because the Israeli and the American Jewish vote really has been divided almost exactly the opposite, with the majority of the Israeli American voters voting for Donald Trump and the majority of the American Jewish voters voting for Joe Biden. Chezi, why do you think that is?
First of all, I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that the majority of Americans, Jewish Americans living in Israel, actually are and will be voting for Joe Biden. But I have to say, at the core of the matter, there is great unity, of course, amongst the Jewish people, no matter where we are. Let's remember why we are here in Israel, and to a very great extent, why, I don't know who else around the table here today with us also went through this experience, but certainly my family did, why we came to the United States. We all did this because we were escaping persecution. And this is a shared value that we have for many, many, many years, generations with the United States. Jews, no matter where they are, certainly in Israel, with our history, the history of the formation of the modern state of Israel, should not be getting into bed with people who, from their point of view, the core supporters of Donald Trump, you can hear them say, as I myself heard these people say when I was growing up in the United States, Hitler didn't finish the job. These aren't the sort of people that are friends.
But Chezi, I have to challenge you. But Chezi, I have to challenge you on that because, again, from Israel's perspective, President Trump has done quite a few accomplishments from recognizing Jerusalem and moving the embassy to the Abraham Accords and dealing with Iran and exiting the JCPOA. So from Israel's perspective, there are a lot of accomplishments there. So I'm not sure that what you're saying resonates.
What you're saying actually doesn't have much to do with what I just talked about. Note, you can have people who are even virulent anti-Semites who, for whatever reasons they may have, for their own interest, will do things that also coincide with your interest. So yes, the Abraham Accords are good for Israel. These are processes that have been going on for many years. They culminated recently, but they've been going on for a long time. They did not begin with Donald Trump. We look at what happened with Iran. This is an area in foreign policy and security policy with which I personally have experience. At the end of the day, the Iranian nuclear capacity, in my estimate, is much stronger than it was at the time that Trump took office. What Trump does is that Trump is a great dismantler. He dismantles agreements just as he does with the Affordable Care Act, and with the Paris Accords. He never puts anything else in its place.
Abe, I want to give you a chance to jump in here.
First, if I may say, that what you went into is preposterous and kind of offensive. Just even to mention the name Hitler in the same sentence as anything about Trump. This is a man who, just to even claim that there's anything anti-Semitic, long before he got into politics. This is somebody who was the Grand Marshal at the Israel Day Parade in New York City.
There are, however, very many extremists who are very proudly and loudly pro-Trump.
There are whatever minuscule percentage of the population is. I guarantee you it pales in comparison to how many hard left people there are running college campuses, running the Democratic Party today, the Squad, the people who are pro-BDS. The people if you're talking about the so-called white nationalists or whatever, it's a few hundred people. How many of them are professors? How many of them are congressmen? What power do any of these people have? And you're talking about a party. If I may finish, you went on for a long time. If you could just let me finish here. Well, I think that in the eyes of a lot of people, both in Israel and America, the Democrats have become a party that excuses Antifa, excuses looting, excuses rioting. And in fact, when you talk about Americans against Americans, this is the agenda of talking about everybody is systemically racist, everybody has privilege. What is that if not dividing one group against another?
Has he a response?
Yes. Well, first of all, as typical of the Trump supporters, I don't want to go so far as to say the Republican Party, because I do not believe that at core, most of the Republican Party, albeit they are fearful of Trump, but I don't actually believe that they really comport with a lot of what he has to say and what he seems to believe in. The core support of Donald Trump, as we all know, his so-called base, is a racist base. We know that. That doesn't mean that all the supporters of Trump, all the Republicans that support Trump are racist. Nobody is saying that, and I'm certainly not saying that as well. But his core support is indeed those very anti-Semitic, racist groups in the United States, as opposed to the people
Based
that were just
on what do you say something like that? That is
You've
bizarre.
got to be kidding me. Get away from Fox for a second and see the rest of the world.
Please go to America. You know, they're half of the country you're talking about. These are
the arms that they bear in the streets. See the slogans that they put out. You know, stand by. Who are you talking about? You're talking about the violent.
Excuse me.
I have no doubt that you know this, and I'm sure that you are also concerned about it. And you yourself, I'm sure, probably don't really believe it. The fact is that these are his support. You mentioned are on the fringe, just like you have fringes on parties. We have always had fringes, both on the left and on the right. The big difference here is that one person, not just a candidate, but the current president of the United States, has brought them fore and center. Biden has rejected them. Biden has a long record of extremely strong support for the state of Israel. He understands security 1,000 times better than Donald Trump. Not only will he be good for security of the state of Israel, it'll be good for the security of the world as well. You need a leader of the United States.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about security, actually, specifically with Iran and international security, because Eli Cohen, the intelligence minister of Israel, he pointed just very recently in an interview on Israeli TV to at least 5 other Arab countries that are very soon supposedly considering joining in the normalization resolutions with Israel, along with the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan. And of course, now he's also again railing against Iran, saying very specifically that Trump's resolve against terror in the region should continue, even if Trump is not necessarily the one in the White House. Let's take a look.
ואם אתה למעשה תהיה נשיא, שאתה לא תבוא ותוכיח נחישות מול איראן, אז מה שיקרה, הם ייקחו את הזמן שלהם, לא ימהרו, לא יבחרו צד, ולכן, כפי שאמרתי, המדיניות של הנשיא שיבחר בארצות הברית, אם היא תמשיך את המדיניות הנוכחית, היא תוכל להוביל להסכמי שלום נוספים. מדיניות ותרנית תתקע את הסכמי השלום.
Now, Chezi, Vice President Biden, at the time that he was, of course, with President Obama, he's one of the architects or at least one of the biggest supporters of the JCPOA nuclear deal and other agreements. He argued against the killing of Qasem Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani from the IRGC. So would Biden continue the pressure on Iran or the supposed arguably positive gains made in the Middle East by President Trump?
Look, note that, first of all, I dispute the fact that President Trump has made gains against Iran. You cannot, and I'm putting aside for the moment the JCPOA. The JCPOA was a flawed agreement. Joe Biden has also said that to the extent that there will be a return to the agreement, it would be with improvements. Pressure must be placed upon Iran. No doubt about it. However, you can't simply just turn aside an agreement and then do nothing in its place. He's done nothing in its place. Iran has become a much stronger country on the geographical scene of the Middle East since Trump has taken power. What's gone on in Syria since Trump has come into office is 1,000 times worse than what went on beforehand. Syria today is simply an amalgamation of Iranian power, Russian power, Chinese power, and ISIS power, as Hezbollah as well. This is all because of the fact that Trump's quote-unquote policy, to the extent he has policies, is rip up an agreement, run away, and do nothing in its place. That's exactly what he's done here as well. I've been very happy to see
back here on, if I may, back here on planet Earth, it's not as if Syria was a Jeffersonian democracy during the Obama-Biden years. That was the era of chemical weapons, if you recall. In terms of Iran and the JCPOA, this gets back to why Americans in Israel vote heavily Republican. People here, look, the president won a majority of the votes in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. There were a lot of people very wary. They didn't know what they were getting with Donald Trump. But after 4 years of a close relationship, unprecedented cooperation in terms of defense, in terms of intelligence, the pressure on Iran, I don't know, but maybe you need to watch a little bit of Fox or read something else, or even talk to the security people here, because in Syria, The Hezbollah, because of the sanctions against Iran, the economy there is a wreck. Hezbollah is a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran, and they are starved for cash. They've got real problems, and there is pushback against them that there wasn't before, particularly in Lebanon and even in Syria. They're not ascendant.
The president's own, if I may, the president's own security experts, who he summarily, of course, dismissed once, for one reason or another, he got ticked off because somebody had a different opinion than himself. But the president's own security experts who've been around for many, many years in the security field, high-ranking generals, left their offices specifically because of the fact that Trump was disengaging completely from Syria. There's no such thing in the Middle East as simply disengaging. It creates a vacuum. Somebody else very quickly fills that vacuum. The vacuum that was created deliberately by Trump picking up and running away, which is what he did. Picking up and running away from Syria was
that's actually a very interesting way of looking at it.
You keep on saying that wasn't the case, but that is the case. You can quote Eli Cohen as much as you want, but the real experts in the intelligence apparatus in Israel know exactly what the true situation is. I find, by the way, somewhat amusing hearing from the Trump camp that I'm the one who needs to get somehow connected into reality. We're not the ones who created this fake Trump world that's been going on for the past few years. But thank God.
I think the attitude that you're seeing here says a lot about why people are not hopping on the anti-Trump train to the extent that he seems to suggest they are. But you're right. The whole thing about a security vacuum, that's interesting. How did ISIS come about in the first place? It was Biden who was in charge of reestablishing a status of forces agreement in Iraq. Iraq was essentially pacified. Barack Obama said so. And then they just pulled the rug out from under them, and look at what happened. So you talk about a vacuum, pulling a couple of hundred people out of one particular part of Syria, and they happen to be redeployed in another part, is not quite the same thing as squandering a war that was essentially won at great cost. Joe Biden, I'm sorry, with that kind of record, is not the person I want in charge of the Middle East.
All right. Well, I want to discuss a little bit further now on Israel-United States relations, more specifically within the leadership, because, Prime Minister Netanyahu's relationship with President Donald Trump is fairly well established at this point. However, he's getting a lot of flack recently for allegedly ignoring or at least neglecting the Democratic camp and Vice President Biden. Opposition leader here in Israel, Yair Lapid, in particular, making a jab.
יש לי קשרים מצוינים עם הרפובליקנים, אבל להבדיל מנתניהו, כל השנים דאגתי לשמור על יחסי עבודה וידידות גם עם ההנהגה הדמוקרטית בסנאט ובבית הנבחרים. נתניהו יודע את זה, רק כמו תמיד, כל מה שמעניין אותו זה האינטרס האישי שלו ויחסי הציבור שלו והיחסים שיש לו עם כל מיני מיליארדרים רפובליקנים.
So, Chezi, I'm going to jump back to you again. Why do you believe that Netanyahu is not talking to the Democrats? Or is he?
First of all, I don't believe that, quite honestly. The Prime Minister Netanyahu is truly one of the more experienced world leaders and a boon for the state of Israel from that point of view. He has tremendous connections, and I know this also personally. He has tremendous connections on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle. It's true that AIPAC has tilted over the years more towards the Republican side of the aisle, but they also are very strong on the Democratic side as well. I believe that Joe Biden, with whom I understand Prime Minister Netanyahu has had a very good relationship for many, many years, even way back when the Prime Minister was the number 2 in the embassy in Washington, and Joe Biden was an important member of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. He has a long-standing relationship with him. And I'm very confident that once Joe Biden takes power, there will continue to be a very strong relationship between whoever is prime minister in Israel, including Prime Minister Netanyahu today, and the incoming president of the United States. I don't see any change in that whatsoever.
I think that we're talking about some actually serious developments in terms of how the Democratic Party has and Israel have been moving apart. But the question is, who's been moving? Netanyahu is the same Netanyahu as he was in 2009. the Democrats, in essence, you have a situation where Israel didn't leave the Democrats have been leaving Israel. And if you want to talk about the rock-solid support that once existed in Congress, in 2008, 2009, let me just say, J Street was a fringe. Today, J Street-endorsed candidates make up more than 50% of Democratic senators, more than 50% of Democratic congressmen. And that doesn't even count the group that is even too far left and anti-Israel for J Street.
Did Netanyahu potentially burn bridges with the Democrats, though, under Obama and Biden? For example, his infamous speech in front of Congress, which he broke a tradition by coming uninvited?
I think that was probably
uninvited by the president. Uninvited by the president.
I think that it was probably a tough call for him, and I think that he probably figured, look, I am the prime minister of Israel. I could get along very nicely with the president if I would just give in on everything. But I am not about to let the Iran nuclear deal go forward without protest. It's an existential issue for Israel, and I think it made a difference. You planted seeds, and ultimately that is why the U.S. got out.
Chezi, final comment?
Well, I don't think, I'm not getting into whether the Prime Minister should have gone or should not have gone against...
But has he burned bridges with the Democratic Party? I know you just touted many of his private relations.
No. He's worked in the past with Democratic presidents and Democratic administrations, both as Prime Minister and other capacities as well. He's, as I mentioned, extremely experienced. And Joe Biden is really as mainstream as you can get. He understands the realities here. He understands the politics here. And you won't find a better partner going forward for the state of Israel than Joe Biden.
Until 9 a.m. every day.
All right, well, unfortunately...
Well, at 9 a.m. every day, Donald Trump is watching television. At least we'll have somebody being president.
All right, well, unfortunately, I know that we could debate this until we're all blue in the face, but that is all the time that we have today. Thank you, Chezi Kugler and Abe Katzman, for joining us.
Thank you.
Tune in, everyone watching at home. Tune in next time on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. And also, of course, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know in the comment sections online. Finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. Go vote if you haven't already. Remember that people who vote differently from you are not necessarily your enemy. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.